Today I want to do something, God gives me these messages, and I heard this young lady say something that really kind of sparked my interest. And and it's so funny because sometimes when I hear something, God will give me a sermon out of it. And today's sermon is called Following Christ. And the reason why I say, God gave me the sermon is because a lot of people don't understand what following Christ means. One thing is, when I heard this young lady, she was asking another young lady, she said she's about to get married and everything else. And she asked her, are you ready to be a servant? And the young lady went off on her and saying, I'm nobody's slave and I'm nobody this. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing this. And they didn't have a clue on what being a servant is, because people keep thinking that being a servant means to be a slave, and it's far from the truth. When you sit up here and get married to somebody, you in a relationship with somebody, you in a friendship with somebody, you serving in church, you doing something to help other people, you become a servant. Okay, that's what being a servant is. When you get married, you become a servant, believe it or not. And if you don't become a servant, then the marriage is not going to last too long. Okay, the servant means really the same thing, but I'm gonna break it down in Jesus term, because I think people really don't have the real meaning of what being a servant is. And it says, if you are not following Christ, you are not a servant. Hear what I'm saying? If you are not following Christ, you are not a servant, because you can't sit up here and be a servant, a true servant, when you call yourself a Christian and you're not following Christ. Okay? So if you're not following Christ, you are not a servant. And people sit up here and say, oh, I'm a servant, but I don't follow Christ. Well, you're a servant, but you ain't the servant that we're talking about, not what I'm talking about. You might be a worldly servant, but you're not a godly servant. And this, I'm going to get a little deeper into this. When you read Mark 10:45, it says certain things and whatnot. And this is one of the things that it says. For even the Son of Man came to minister, came to not to be ministered to unto, but to be ministered to minister to. Okay, let me try to say this again. It says, even the Son of Man came not to be minister unto. So Jesus didn't come, for to be ministered to. He came to minister to us. That's what this means when it says that. Okay, he gave his life for ransom for many. So Jesus literally died for all of us. He gave his own life, okay, for us. Okay, he came to minister to us, not to be ministered to. He came to minister to us. That's a part of being a servant. Is to minister somebody is part of being a servant, and people don't realize that either. They always take things what it isn't. And he gave his own life in this. He gave his own life to many. He died for the world. Okay, so you want to say many? He died for the world. And that's what this is talking about. Jesus came to serve, not to be served. Hear what I'm saying? Jesus came to serve, not to be served. Okay, and even though we know he's the Son of God, he's the highest of highs, Jesus himself came to serve, not to be served. Jesus suffered. Let me see. How can I say this? Jesus laid a foundation for us, which Jesus. How can I say this? He left an example for us. Okay, to follow in his footsteps. And when we read his word, every time you read the word, Jesus tell you, he give you examples on what to do, how to be a servant, how to follow his footsteps. The problem is we either don't read the word or we don't follow his footsteps because we don't want to. Not because we can't. Not because we, because we don't want to. Anything that we do that Jesus tell us to do, and we don't follow example by what he said, that's because we don't want to do it, because we think it's too much. We think it's gonna too much out of our time. It takes too much of this. It takes too much of that. So we don't want to do that. So, and that's really what that's all about, because we do what we want to do, and that's a big issue right there. Jesus bared our sins in his own body. Okay, Jesus bared our sins now in his own body. Okay, so we would be dead to sin. Hear what I'm saying? Jesus took on our sin in his own body, so we would be dead to sin. This is somebody that loves us so much that he took our sins and he put it in his own body. So all the torment you go through, the mind things you go through, the sickness and disease, everything that you go through went into Jesus' body and whatnot, just for us. So we would be dead to sin. And when we hear this, we don't understand the significance on how important this is. We just look at these as words, but we don't understand the significance on how it is. And it says, by his stripes, we are healed. Every stripe that Jesus took, every whooping that he got, every thorn that went in his head, everything that happened to Jesus Christ and whatnot, you understand, is the reason why we are healed. The reason why we are forgiven. The reason why we are whole is because is by his stripes. Hear what I'm saying? It's by his stripes that we are healed. It's by his stripes that we are whole. It's by his stripes that we are still here. It's by Jesus' stripes. The stripes that he took, the beatings that he took, the abuse that he took is the reason why we here. The reason why we healed. All of this is because of the stripes of Jesus, the stripes that Jesus took for us. Once again, we don't understand how significant this is and what it really means. And this is why God has given me this word on following Christ. Okay? So when you say you are a follower of Christ and you are not serving, you are not a follower of Christ. I'll say this again. If you say you are a follower of Christ but is not serving, you are not a follower of Christ. Okay, and people always want to take one without the other. You always want to talk about I follow Christ and whatnot, but when it comes to serving somebody, it's beneath you. You can't do that because it's too beneath you to serve anybody. Okay, and this is what it is. And the strangest thing is when you read the word and whatnot, it talks about Peter, it talks about James, it talks about Mary, it talks about Luke, it talks about Timothy. All of them followed Christ. All of them was believers, and they all call themselves servants. Isn't that amazing that they all call themselves servants? Okay, and which they was. So if you are a Christian, you should be a server. If you are a Christian, you should be a server. Now, people that's not Christians and running around here doing their thing and whatnot of the world and whatnot, that's a whole different ball game. I ain't got nothing to do with that. I'm talking about people that call themselves Christians. And if you call yourself a Christian, you should be a server. Okay? Being a minister or being in ministry, okay, is nothing but being a server. Let me say this again. If you are a minister, a pastor, a preacher, a deacon, anything that has to do with ministry, okay, you are nothing more than a server. Yes, you have a title, okay, but the bottom line is you are a server, okay. If Jesus was good enough to be server, you should be good enough to be a server, okay. The problem that we have is you have so many deacons, pastors, ministers, and everybody else that got a title, okay, and want people to serve them instead of them serving people. And this is not what being a server is. Anytime you enter ministry, you are a server when it comes to in God's eye. You are not above anybody else. You are supposed to be a server. People are not supposed to be serving you. You're supposed to be serving God's people. Okay? If Jesus did it, what in the world makes you think that you better than Christ, that you can't do it? Okay? When you read Philippians 2 and 4, okay, It says, look not every man on his own thing, but every man also on things of others. Which means stop being concerned about only your things, okay? And you're not worrying about other people's things. Because we done got to the point now where we're so concerned about only our things that we forget about other people's things. And we fall short and whatnot because it's all about us. It's all about what we have and the heck with everybody else. And that's not what God is saying. You know, you got to take the attitude that Jesus had on, take the attitude that Jesus had. What I mean is, the attitude that Jesus had was being in the form of God, even though he was the form of God, but he made himself no reputation and took upon himself the form of a servant. Hear what I'm saying, okay? Even though Christ was the form of God, okay, he had no reputation, okay? He didn't take on a reputation. He took upon himself the form of a servant, okay? He was the Son of God, but yet and still he took on the form of a servant. And yet and still we think we too good to take on the form of a servant, but Christ himself did it, okay? Remember, this is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and yet and still he did it. And was made in the likeness of man. Jesus, when he came to this earth, he was made in the likeness of man. Jesus humbled himself and became obedient unto death. Listen to what he's literally. He humbled himself so much that he became obedient to death. Jesus had the authority over death, but yet and still for us, he humbled himself and became obedient to death. We're talking about the Son of God now. Jesus had to humble himself to take the form of a servant. The only way that he could sit up here and humble himself to death is he had to humble himself to take the form of a servant, okay? To humble himself unto death. That we're talking about the Son of God, okay? Jesus gave up his divine privileges and took the humble position of a servant. Hear what I'm saying? Jesus gave up his divine privileges. Remember, he's the Son of God. He can speak something and it just happens, whatever goes on. He gave up his privileges and humbled himself to the position of a servant. He humbled his own self to a position of a servant. And yet and still we have an issue on being a servant. Isn't that something that we have a problem being a servant? But Jesus Christ himself gave up be humbled himself and took on a position as being a servant. He humbled himself and died a criminal death on a cross. Hear what I'm saying? He humbled himself and died a criminal death on a cross. Listen to what I'm saying. You know what? I got to do another part of this because this is so deep and this is so important that people got to understand what I'm saying on this. So I'm going to do a part 2 on this and whatnot to get this going because this is so important. And I'm going to stop right here and I'm going to pick up right where I left off at on this one.